Assassin's Promise by Thomas Woodward. Chapter 82. Calian moved with a swift step. He crossed the gangplank onto the salt-sprayed docks, which gently rocked back and forth under his weight. He moved with a grace he did not feel. The captain had been a sore loser, and had tried to keep half his gold coin when they had arrived in just under the full 10 days. Calian had no pity for the man. He had gambled and lost. A subtle reminder of who he was, and his open threat of involving the local constables if necessary, left the captain angry and quiet. He had lost, that was all. Sometimes you did. With a wave for a bright-eyed female deckhand he had met along the journey, he left the gently rocking ship behind. The woman called out to him, and when he did not reply, gave a deep, throaty laugh. He had shared with her some of the finer points of playing a player's flute. The way she had held it had set his blood pounding. He was convinced she had needed no instruction, and she had merely wanted an excuse to see how badly he played. He cut a sharp figure as his cape billowed over one shoulder from where it was fastened high near his collar. The deep red cape waved like an unfurled flag against a sudden gust. The foamy smell of the sea lingered here, and he breathed deeply, not wanting to part with it now. A sturdy leather jerkin, with his house colors of red and orange over a violet field, kept him warm and would give a measure of protection against a shallow knife thrust. The brown painted leather reminded him of home. The leather reminded him of his mother. She had always favored leather gloves. The warm, cherry-colored leather had been worked into many of her riding outfits when he was young. Before he had left his home, he thought of his mother some days. Part of him loved her dearly, but another part of him saw her as a stranger. Just another sad traveler through this world. She had not wanted him, a fact his father had constantly reminded him of. He had seen his father use that fact over and over against his mother, to bludgeon her into submission. Calian had often been afraid to speak during meals for fear of angering one of them. Instead, he had chosen to create his own world of imagination. He had always loved the theater from a young age. He remembered the first day his family's carriage had rumbled past. Players had been in the street calling on the crowd. A young woman wreathed in a crown of flowers had gestured invitingly to the crowd while singing to the accompaniment of a beautiful timbre. From that day forward, he had been a lover of music. He had longed to become a player and lose himself in the fantasy they created on stage. He worshipped Mestur, the greatest playwright of his age. Just past his 9th naming day, the man himself had visited the city of Kaliapos for only a single day. Calian had begged to go and see the playwright as he traveled through the streets of the city. He had tried everything to get his parents to take him. When nothing worked, his pleas falling on deaf ears, he raged and cried and made threats. No one seemed to notice. Dejected, he had returned to his rooms. He had crafted a miniature stage for himself. He had memorized the lines of many of the players of his favorite plays and would amuse himself, acting as both player and audience member. He didn't envy his brothers or sisters, so eager they were to appease his parents. They strained to impress his father and would often go out with him on hunting expeditions for sport. He abhorred the cruel practice. Where was the justice in killing an animal who could not defend itself? His mother had already begun to lose her mind. He could see that now, looking back at his early memories. His sister must have felt out of place, unsure whether to side with father or mother, who was rapidly slipping away. He stopped walking and hung his head low for a moment. No, he did not blame them for their choices. 2 of his brothers had been quickly taken into the ranks of the Western Army, their father's noble birth earning them officer commissions. A 3rd had died in sickness as a child. His sister Emily had grown more and more terrified of the sickness that had claimed his mother's mind. She had raged against it in her last years, eventually taking her own life. He wondered if she saw it as a way out. He forced himself to smile. He would carry the happiness his sister and brother no longer could in this world. He breathed out the cool air as fluttering rose petals fell in front of him everywhere he looked. The city moved to the powerful beat of the festival. he caught sight of a pretty young woman, freckles and curious blue eyes stark against her golden locks of hair. She laughed as another young man her age chased her enthusiastically, laughing in open mirth. The two met and embraced, smiling. Kalian smiled more openly, rubbing his hand against the coat of arms in the center of his chest, painted onto the leather. He hoped his mother eventually found peace. Half of all his winnings he saved for her. Someday he would do right by her. But he could not bear to be with her anymore. The madness had come on strong, and its effects had destroyed their already fractured family. Kalian had sent letters years ago to his brothers, but they never wrote back to him. They could be dead for all he knew. He had visited his family estate once, years ago, when he had last returned to his homeland. The great keep had been grown over with vines and moss. No one remained there. As eldest, it was his duty to keep his ancestral home out of disrepair, but he could not face it. There were too many haunting memories there. He wondered idly if it had completely collapsed into ruin by now. His brothers must be dead. They had never returned to the city in all these years, from what he had gathered. He banished the bitter images from his mind, turning a street corner, passing low houses in one of the poorer areas of town. The docks held trade for the city, but many of the houses were poorly constructed, or old and falling apart at the timbers. Kalian wanted to walk the streets and take the city in. It was always a wonder seeing it unfold in front of him. Passing into a quarter with more modest homes, he spied a group of young children who gathered in a group, chatting excitedly before scattering as he approached. They looked happy. A young woman walked home carrying a pitcher on her head, balanced carefully, steadying it every other moment or so with one arm. Her other arm carried several baked goods. Kalian's mouth watered, and he realized he hadn't eaten yet this morning. Eily had turned his mind from such matters, as she had given him a riling discourse on the finer points of the flute well past breakfast. She had wanted the captain to put in the ship for a day so she could educate him further before they moved off the coast again. The twinkle he had seen in her eye set him smiling again as he climbed the hilly streets that led him into the merchant's quarter. Bright signs swung easily on oiled metal rods over large, two-storied buildings that clearly displayed their wares through rich sheets of gilt-marked glass. Artisans of many cities gathered here in Kalyapos. The promise of ready sea trade encouraged fantastic commissions from wealthy merchants who appreciated the finer things in life. A ready throng of artists and conmen appeared every day, hoping to make their fortune, through honest methods or otherwise. The nobility rubbed elbows here in the lavish section of the city, where old wealth and new money met, often drawn by the same interests. The city catered to both, but the merchants had less authority here. Azric's family made sure nobility kept the upper echelons of power. Kalian wondered how his friend's father fared. The last time he had seen the ill-tempered man, he had been a young man himself. He had shared a fondness for the man's taste in wine and the arts, but he had never liked the man himself. Azric's father had always kept a hateful eye turned towards his only son. There was no love lost between them. Kalian wondered if it had always been that way. Azric's father had never hid his love of drink very well, though. The chambermaids, who had the misfortune of stumbling upon him in a drunken stupor, either riled his anger or his lust. Kalian felt sorry for them in equal measure. He was ready to see the pig-faced monarch. He would greet him with charm. Perhaps he could entreat Azric's father for a loan. He felt his now bone-dry coin pouch and suppressed a groan. He hated playing the beggar, but he would do so with aplomb if necessary.